to you.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for having me here, for giving me this space to share the work I've been doing for the past 3 years, let's say. Since we are a small group, I was thinking that perhaps this can be a little bit more of a conversation and less of me just dictating what is happening in the space. Of course, as Penny said, there are lots of things I have learned. I would like perhaps start, and don't feel you have to, this is perhaps more of an invitation to perhaps share with me what you would like to hear or what you would like to learn, or any questions, anything you might have, so I can also decide what gets more attention or less attention. And if there is nothing coming up now, that's perfectly okay. If things come up as I'm speaking, just raise your hand and I'm very happy to open the space.
Have you had a chance to do a bit of a survey of the different approaches to yoga nidra? Is that going to be for you at all?
So, yes and no. The reason being, so everything I have done, the intention behind it was to make it as easy as possible for the NHS to say yes to trial it out. And this was not formally done via any rigorous academic procedure. I've just tried to speak with as many people as possible and try to understand what I could do to have them saying yes. Answer one, make it very easy to make it protocolized, because that's what they want it repeatable. But then at the same time, I also wanted to make it bespoke, because that's what I learned, that it works. So then I've tried to make it as protocolized as possible, that they would say yes, but with enough freedom to do the co-creation. So I have used a lot of my personal experience, what I learned with you on the diploma, and I've tried as much as I could to just replicate what I've been doing with my clients. So I've used Uma's 9 steps, but then the middle part is co-creation, like you taught me. So just asking people where they want to go, how they want to feel, getting as many notes and really picking up on language and keywords, and then trying to wave them in as much as I could in the protocol. And I was quite lucky that one of the big dogs at King's, he has really struggled with depression his whole life. And he has tried everything and nothing worked. And when I told him about Yoga Nidra and about personalization, he got very excited. And then he gave me £15,000 to do the MRI. I think, again, this unfortunately is very unjust. He's Italian, I'm Italian. And unfortunately, sometimes these kind of things, they help. And I was also lucky that he was banging about having more project-led PhDs rather than professors-led PhDs. And I was doing well with my grades, so it didn't look too reckless. And then he gave me a space to do it. So I haven't done a very academically thorough selection. It's more, they just trusted me. And what, I have seen working, so I just wanted to test it.
I'm really interested in the science, the neuroscience.
Mm-hmm.
It's an area that I just find fascinating. I know you've been doing lots of work on it, and so that's what I'm going to be really focused on.
Mm-hmm.
So, I don't know how I did it, but I cured my chronic migraines through increasing my meditation, daily meditation by a few more hours.
Mm-hmm.
Cured in 2 weeks. So, and I'm fascinated by how did that happen? What's the psychoneuroimmunological mechanisms that work there?
Mm-hmm.
The chronic stress. The other thing that helped was changing my job role.
And I think here you've said a lot. So, as I will say later, 2 weeks is not enough time to experience neuroplasticity. It takes at least 6 months to see, 3 to 6 months to see some structural changes in the brain. So we'll
I'm
likely.
doing meditation before.
Okay.
I'm a long-term meditator.
Okay. So it was not a 2 weeks intervention.
But I increased my meditation probably because I was a busy mental health nurse and a very busy ward.
Yeah.
Basically, I was only doing meditation 20 minutes to half an hour at most in the mornings.
Which is more than enough.
But then I increased it to 2 or 3 hours, and that made a huge difference.
Yes. So now that I have a little bit more background on what you shared, so actually what I have found is that twice a week, 20 minutes of just lying on your back has a very significant effect on your mental health. Regardless, it is yoga nidra or restorative yoga with music, it doesn't matter. Just chilling, taking time to be is all you need. And 20 minutes twice a week is not that much time. And there was no difference between people that were practicing 5 times a week, the 20 minutes, or 2 times. So we actually don't need that much to see an effect, which I think is promising, because then it makes it a lot more manageable for people to commit to things. And so that's the first point, that I think this is my critique of the traditional mode, that, you just need all this volume, all these hours. But actually this came from what I've learned from Lisa, that actually if you review the literature, one of the best studies is the one on lower back pain, and actually they also found that 1 hour a week was more than enough to find a significant effect, and that's exactly what I did. It was an hour divided into 3 sessions of 20 minutes. And an hour was not even enough, was not even needed. 40 minutes was more than enough. And I think this just relieves such a big weight from people, that they have to put so much, they think, I need to put like 10 hours a week to get better. When in reality, from what I found, you don't need all that commitment, which big relief. But then going to your point, that then you increased it. This I don't have any data on, but I have done Vipassana twice. And I have to say, in those 10 days of doing 10 hours a day, of course, I found like a massive spike in growth. But I think is in anything in life, you just dedicate more time, then you're, the compounding effect just like, but you have definitely built that base from years and years and years of practice. So your brain was primed to change, and then you just gave it like a steroids.
It was quite a serious point. I had auras, I had blackouts.
Yeah.
I had to leave my job. I went to A&E, they said, you have early onset dementia.
Oh, wow, okay.
It was quite neurological. I was under a neurologist.
Yeah.
It was quite serious.
So I think perhaps also something that I'm going to present might shed some light on this big shift. And I think my modelistic paper tries to answer to this question of like, why all of a sudden yoga makes us feel better, and why have other therapies not worked? What was the missing link? That I think we all know that's mind-body. So I often speak about mind-body therapies, because I don't think I just do yoga anymore. I've learned so much about somatics, hypnotherapy, somatic experiencing, psychotherapy, hypnosis. So it all got very mixed up. So I often present it more as mind-body therapies rather than only yoga, because I think all of us have taken bits and bobs from other disciplines, and then we have yogified it with the breath. We have taken from, and yoga in the end means union. So we've united lots of things together. We're taking the best of all worlds and try to offer something that is useful. Anything else?
Can I just ask, if somebody asks you a question, if you can repeat the essence of the question so that Mike picks it up?
Yes.
I'm not sure that everybody's voices will be heard in the mic.
Yeah.
So when we get to questions, then I'm...
Thank you for reminding me. Yes, that's also what I have to do when I teach at King's, and I always forget to do it. So thank you for reminding me. Okay, so I will keep going. Some stuff I will go quickly, but please, if you want me to spend more time, just raise your hand and I will change my pace. Okay? So I'm here to present the work I've been doing at King's on the psychoneuroimmunology of yoga nidra and restorative yoga with music. For those of you that are not familiar with psychoneuroimmunology, is a relatively modern branch of medicine that looks at the interaction between the mind and the body, and in particular the interaction between the brain, the mind, the immune system, and the hormones. So we don't need to spend too much time here, but I have spent most of my life studying, basically. I spent probably the past 15 years learning, and not all of it was probably useful, but I guess we learn as we go. I'm a registered yoga teacher, yoga therapist, and now I've also expanded into Thai yoga massage, which has been a very interesting journey. I have done lots of things in my life. I had a charity in Rwanda working with genocide survivors. I've been a growth hacker. And if you're wondering what a growth hacker is the person behind hypergrowth of startups. Very stressful job that I left behind to become a yoga teacher and then a yoga therapist, and now also masseuse. And for the past 3 years, I've been working as a neuroscientist at King's, where I supervise students for their final thesis, and I teach them how to be little neuroscientists. And I also give lectures on the psychoneuroimmunology of mind-body therapies. These are some of my clients. I have tried to work with the NHS, and that was a very interesting experience. And I was working with healthcare providers. How did I get here? So some of you do know that during the pandemic, I started working one-to-one with lots of people that had depression. I was very unqualified at the time, and I was trying to do my best. But what I noticed is that some of them were getting better, and many of them had treatment-resistant depression, which means those are people that don't respond to antidepressants. And they were getting better, and then I was like, okay, this is not magic. There must be a reason why they're getting better. And I was very lucky to be supervised by Mark Stevens, that I think many of you know. And Mark was like, Carola, it's great what you're doing. Like, I was testing things on them. I had a heart variability monitor. I had a little EEG machine. I did a questionnaire as well online to look at people's, how yoga was impacting people's subjective well-being during the pandemic. And Mark was like, Carola, it's all great what you do, but you're a bedroom scientist. And unfortunately, your work will have no impact. You need to go with a university. And then the diploma in yoga therapy taught me a lot about psychoneuroimmunology and how everything collaborates. And then it just gave me lots of cues. And then I got in touch with Professor Pariante at King's College London. He's the leading psychoneuroimmunologist in the UK. And he was like, I managed to talk to him. And then he was like, great, but you don't have any scientific background. You cannot do a PhD. So you need to embark on a master, and then we're going to see. I think he thought that I would give up and not continue. I think that was his hope. But I kept going, and I think he regretted it. But anyways, so during my master, I really spent a lot of time to try to understand why those patients were experiencing what they were experiencing, and trying to understand, okay, why does yoga work? And this was a very interesting clue. So these people that have treatment-resistant depression compared to people that respond to antidepressants, they're inflamed. Please consider that this inflammation is tiny. It's not the inflammatory markers they would find in somebody that has cancer. It's just a little bit higher than the norm. And there has been lots of trials trying to give them anti-inflammatory medications, but unfortunately the results have been very mixed. So it seems that that's not the key. So then I started asking myself the question, okay, have we looked too narrow? Why the antidepressants don't work and the anti-inflammatory medications don't work? So then I looked, okay, what's abnormal there? And we know that the HPA axis, the hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis, which is the molecular cascade that produces cortisol, is abnormal. So what happens is people produce too much cortisol because they get stuck into this stress response. And as a consequence, they get inflamed because too much cortisol produces inflammation. This is a simplified version, but more than enough to know. And of course, they also experience reduced parasympathetic tone. And there are lots of studies that also show that their brain really changes. So the parts of the brains that promote sympathetic drive, they get bigger, and the parts that promote parasympathetic, they get smaller. So really structural changes to the brain. Again, neuroplasticity goes down. So again, this changes in the brain. And in some people, some parts of the brain get a lot smaller. A lot of cells die. And this, for me, now is the most interesting part. So functional MRI, which is, that big machine that they put you inside in, which is a big magnetic field that basically measures the structure of your brain, but also the function of your brain. And it basically does a 3D model of your brain. And then if you're running an fMRI protocol, you're actually looking at which areas of the brain are active by looking at where is the oxygen in the brain. And you can give people tasks, and there's been so much research to try to understand, okay, when people do this happens in the brain. And then neuroscientists have discovered that the brain works in networks. So we have different regions quite far away from one another that they collaborate to compute a task. And there is a super network that is the most important network, which is called the salience network, that is kind of like a governor, and it decides whether we are into the default mode network, which is rumination, or whether we go into attention network. And people that are depressed, they get stuck into the default mode network, so in the loop, and they cannot switch. And what's interesting is that this salience network, its key region is the insula, which promotes interoception. And then we know that people that are depressed or anxious or any mental health conditions, they have either hyper or hypo interoception. So then I started wondering, does yoga work? Because we're actually increasing people's interoception. And is yoga working because we're actually teaching people that it's safe to downregulate and switch into parasympathetic? And antidepressants don't do this. And talking therapy, of course, can work towards this, but it does not target it physiologically. And then I reviewed a lot of the literature on yoga and mindfulness, and surprise, surprise, I found evidence that yoga and mindfulness, they reverse all the things that are abnormal in depression. But there was no study that was really trying to put the big picture together. There was one study on this, one study on that, and then I was like, okay, can we get all together to see if this is true or not? And this is a model that I put together when I was trying to understand all these bits and bobs of informations and try to explain, okay, why have antidepressants not worked? So we have two stress pathways, HPA axis, hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis, that produce cortisol. And then we have the sympathetic response of the autonomic nervous system. Cortisol production is slow, so this system takes minutes to kick in. Autonomic, very quick, very fast. And normally what happens, there is a stressor, adrenaline kicks in, of course it binds to all the receptors, HPA axis kicks in, and then eventually when the stressor is over, it downregulates, and then you go back to baseline. But if people are chronically stressed or depressed, this downregulation doesn't happen. So what I think yogic techniques do, they downregulate those two stress pathways, top down and bottom up, which was the paper that you shared with us, Anna. And they do things, one short term and one long term, going back to your point. So we know, for example, that breathwork, movements, and awareness, interoception, they downregulate the autonomic nervous system acutely. 5 minutes of breathwork, immediately you see a change in heart rate variability, you see changes in, there are very many ways to measure it, but we do know that's all it takes, 5 minutes of long deep breathing. If you move to like 6 breaths per minute, people go down and relax. We all know this. Great. People don't need to be experts. They can get what it feels to be relaxed in a few minutes. Very good. And then top-down practices like meditation, affirmations, visualization, and yoga nidra, they seem to take a little bit longer to kick in. I think because it's more of an adaptive response and it works more on neuroplasticity. So it just takes longer for it to work. And if you actually think about it in yogic terms, what do they recommend you to do first? Movement, breathwork, meditation. So the yogis kind of like intuitively already understood this, that something has to come first because it has a quicker effect, and some comes later because it takes longer.
Can I ask a question?
Of course.
So when you're discussing it taking longer, are you talking about at a specific time point, or are you talking about over a number of weeks?
So from what I found in the literature, 6 months minimum.
So a core element here that I want to bring in
Yes.
is the increase of hippocampal volume,
Yes.
which is regulating the whole HPA axis, right? I mean,
6 months minimum.
Within this, it's pretty prime, right?
Yes.
The regulation of this.
But that takes minimum 6 months to happen. So if you look at, for example, like if you look a lot at beyond yoga, if you look at studies on neurogenesis, so really that growth of the hippocampus, that's why they also recommend antidepressants for minimum 6 months, because it just takes that time for the cells. Like when they do in vitro studies as well, it just really takes time for those cells to be reproduced and grow and harborize. So also when I was planning my PhD, initially they were telling me do 6 months, and then we were like, okay, let's see 3 months first and then do 6 months later. But a cell doesn't grow overnight. It really takes time.
So we can discuss this later, because I don't want to commentary this, but the research from Harvard and Hosel often shows 6 weeks. So I'd love to discuss that with you privately.
Yes. So okay, a quick answer to your question is neuroplasticity and neurogenesis are two different things. So neuroplasticity is the precursor of neurogenesis. So yes, changes can actually happen overnight, because also studies that have looked at neuroplasticity over sleep, you can see that if you sleep over it, you're going to see some changes in harborization of dendrites. But that doesn't mean that that's consolidated. It's going to take time for it to really be solid. So we can argue that the shortest interval for neuroplasticity is a night of sleep. The day after, we're going to see some changes, but that is not neurogenesis. That is neuroplasticity. It's just the dendrites connecting more with one another. When we're really seeing changes in gray matter, that it's a more long-term process, and really deeping into neurogenesis takes a longer period of time, because neurons grow slowly, especially as adults, which doesn't mean that they don't change. There is plasticity. We know the brain is not fixed, but it's not something that happens very quickly. So perhaps what has been observed in 6 weeks is neuroplasticity. Absolutely, that happens. But for neurogenesis to happen and really see big structural changes that you would measure with an MRI, that's a longer period of time, from what I understand. Yeah. No, that's all good. I said to keep it open so then we can answer to questions. So, yogic techniques, bottom up, top down. What I think happens is that via breath work, posture, and awareness, we're teaching people to switch into parasympathetic tone. As they keep coming back into parasympathetic tone, their HPA axis downregulates. As their HPA axis downregulates, inflammation goes down. As inflammation goes down, allostatic load goes down. And if you're wondering, okay, what is allostatic load? It's basically the cost of stress, how it taxes the system. And then what happens then is that metabolic function is recalibrated. And this is a very important point that comes from Lisa Barrett Farrell. She wrote a book about emotions. I think some of you might know her. And she basically suggests that depression is a metabolic condition. And what happens is when people are chronically stressed, they just need to mobilize a lot of resources. There is a lot of energy because you need to be able to react to unpredictability. But then if you're in this state for a long period of time, your energy reserves depletes. And then the system eventually crashes. So if you look at studies of people that are depressed, they have hypometabolic function because their system is kind of slowing down to preserve and stay alive. So what happens here is if people are still in the stress phase, it teaches them that it's okay to slow down. And if people are in the depressed phase, it slowly builds up their energy reserves. And then, so there is not a lot of research on this, so this is more speculative. On yoga, unfortunately, there's very little research on metabolism, but this is likely what's happening. And then we experience cognitive reappraisal. So people really start seeing the other side of the coin, start seeing the full side of the glass. And what this is neuroplasticity, what we were just talking about a moment ago, where, you know, those new connections are starting to form. And neuroplasticity can only happen if inflammation goes down. If the system is inflamed, it's not going to happen. So it's really like, it's a cascade. And I think what antidepressants don't do, they don't teach people how to go into parasympathetic tone, and then as a consequence, the cortisol is more of a consequence of teaching them that it's safe to relax, it's safe to calm down. Of course.
Is there a epigenetic effect here, like starting yoga, whatever doses you have, that will somehow turn off some of the genes?
That's a beautiful question, but yes. So is there any possible epigenetic effect of yoga practices? So for people who don't know what's epigenetic, is the branch of genomics that studies how genes can be switched on and off by your environment. So from what I know, I haven't seen any studies that have really studied the epigenetics of yoga long term. There is one, but like there needs to be a lot more. There are a few studies that have looked at inflammation. There is a couple by this guy called Khan, Cahn. There are some limitations to the studies. I think there needs to be a lot more studies done there. So I think it's possible, but we cannot say for certain.
There was one really groundbreaking study which included Elizabeth Blackburn.
Yeah. No.
She was the Nobel Prize winning person who discovered telomerase,
Yeah.
the enzyme which increases telomeres. And she demonstrated that with a trial using, what is this one try again? Whatever it is, that following 12 weeks there was an increase in telomerase. And there's some telomerase isn't okay. Telomerase is just an enzyme that makes sure that you can continue to replicate your DNA to make it really quick, and it increases the longevity of you overall. But there's also research that's related from the Henry Benson Institute showing that in 8 weeks of relaxation, there's a significant change in up and down regulation of genes. It was a 2003 study.
And this is great, but two studies is not enough to make a generalization. So that's like why I said I cannot answer your question, because 1-2 studies, we don't know anything. And to be honest, even when we have 10, 15, 20 studies, if you're really analyzing them critically, you're like, ugh, the results are always contradicting. So that's one of my biggest learnings from my PhD, is that we don't really know. Yes. Also, this is all theoretical, and it's me putting together studies. I could be completely wrong. This is just thinking, which is always very different from practice. And then you see my results and understand why it's, and my study, it's by no means, I will never use my study to say Yoga Nidra does this, restorative yoga does this, because having known what went behind the scenes, I would definitely not take seriously my results. And then I can also go into that discussion, but it really, if you want to do things very robust, it just takes so much effort and so many people analyzing the same thing from very many different perspectives to be certain of something. I have I think I'm more uncertain than when I started, for sure. I'll go very quickly through this. I think all of you know that we're very stressed, and stress is mainly driven by being lonely and uncertainty, because they're both very metabolically expensive, because the system needs to increase this cortisol production to make sure that we can adapt to potential threats or uncertainties. There are lots of studies that show people that are alone the day after, they have more cortisol, same for uncertainty. And of course, more cortisol, more stress equal more neuropsychiatric conditions and more non-communicable diseases. You all know this. Stress is not necessarily bad. We need a bit of stress to have a bit of oomph in life. No stress, we become a bit floppy. But while acute stress is good, increases performance, and it has a start and an end, chronic stress, it's just this repeating loop. You all know this very well. I don't need to preach you that everything is energy and that we need to fuel our energy bank. We need to rest, we need to replenish. We all know this. I use more this slide when I'm presenting to bankers or people that have no clue why they're burning out. But you all know this better than I do. My study. My study is a 12-week feasibility study. So I was trying to understand if giving people 12 weeks of yoga nidra and 2 sessions with a yoga therapist online will be acceptable and feasible, because nowadays in science what you want to first check, okay, do people actually want this? Because if they don't want it, there is no point in going any further. And then, because my sample is still very small, looking at the psychoneuroimmunological mechanisms is a investigation. It's kind of more like, okay, let's just have a peek. But by no means I can answer to the question of what is the psychoneuroimmunology of yoga nidra. I will need a lot of people working with me for probably 20, 30 years to answer that question. Yes. Yeah. And you always want to start, this is what Pariantes taught me, you always start small and then you keep increasing. And he has taught me, okay, if you really want to prove something, you're going to be doing this for at least 30 years. And yeah.
So you're planning to do it?
No. I hope somebody will take the baton and take it further. I hope some very brilliant, intelligent students will do what I've not been able to do. And I also really hope they get some money to do it, so they don't have to do what I've done. Which unfortunately I'm not sure if it will happen. We can go into that later. So I have tried to collect as much data as possible, and I've made my life very hard trying to collect all this data, which it takes so much money to analyze. Truth being that people promise me money and then they didn't want to give me money anymore. So I have a lot of data that is actually unanalyzed, and it might not even get analyzed. And this is the truth, unfortunately. I've collected questionnaires, which those are easy peasy. That's why most studies do that, because they're easy to analyze, easy to collect, zero cost, basically. And that's why we have a lot of that out there. And I've looked at changes in anxiety, depression, emotional distress, and perceived stress. Then I tried to get some hard science in and collect the most cutting-edge data I could. I used this very fancy EEG machine, which is the best on the market, 64 channels, super high density, that they allow me to use for free. Very grateful for that. And with EEG, I've looked at brain function in real time, and I've looked at brain waves. So fluctuations in brain waves. I looked at an event-related potential, and what that is a traditional EEG analysis, electroencephalogram analysis. They've looked at, okay, from an event, how long it takes for the brain to do something. What's the delay, and then is the activity up or down on the wave? And normally what you do, you just average a lot of data to get how how long is the response from the event to this peak or drop of activity. And I've tried to look at the only marker for interoception that we have, which is the heartbeat evoked potential, which is basically my event is the heartbeat. And then what I'm measuring is how long does it take for the brain to actually see when the heartbeat happens. So it's like, how does the brain perceive the heart? So it's kind of like, can the brain feel the heart? So is there an interoceptive ability of the brain to feel the heartbeat? And then I've looked at this very cutting edge analysis called microstates. I'm going to share the data on that because I have it. And later you'll see a picture. But it's basically the equivalent of the large brain networks I was talking about, but done with EEG. And then I still need to do this analysis called source localization. So I'm really trying to see, okay, where is the signal coming from the brain? Because a limitation of EEG is that it's very good at seeing things in real time, but it doesn't really know where the signal is coming from. And then, yes, my MRI is very good at seeing where things come from, but to do an EEG scan, it cost me £2. To do an MRI, it cost me 750. So with £15,000, I only managed to get 11 people scanned. Zero power, meaning my data is useless. They paid for it because they just wanted data collected, and I basically collected the data for free for them because I was the one managing the participants. But from a statistical point of view, useless, because I needed a lot more people, and I didn't have like £100,000 to do it statistically significant. So where I'm going with this is that because EEG is so cheap, is a way more feasible method to use. I've also collected biomarkers in saliva. I've looked at inflammatory markers. I've looked at BDNF, brain-derived neurotrophic factor, which is a peripheral marker of neuroplasticity. I have been told that it was okay to do it, but they told me, please don't say that you see increases in neuroplasticity only looking at your BDNF, because BDNF can also just increase if you do some exercise, and is not necessarily indicating real changes. But they were like, keep it there, but be careful with how you explain your findings. And then, of course, cortisol fluctuation. So cortisol is quite a complex data collection. You give people 6 of those vials, you color them because they need to be taken at specific intervals, and you want to take 6 samples over a day. And getting people to take those at the right time was a challenge. So again, I don't know how correct my data is, because when you're working with humans, you cannot look at what they're doing when they're out of the lab. So I hope it's good what I got, but I'm not 100% sure that is really valid. And then with the MRI, I've run a few protocols. One was looking at neuroinflammation, one was looking at volume, and one brain function. So this thing down here is called an ELISA plate, and that's the analysis I was doing in the lab to look at the different proteins or enzymes. And you take the saliva, then you do lots of processes, and you do that. People had to practice for 3 months. The suggestion was 3 times per week, but I didn't want them to feel guilty if they didn't. So I tried to give them a little bit of space. And just really let people be and try to keep it as naturalistic as possible. They met me online twice, once for 50 minutes and one for 30 minutes. On the first session, we spent the first 15 to 20 minutes doing some light counseling. So asking them, okay, why are you taking part in the study? What's on your plate? Why are you stressed? And what would you like to get out of it? And then some people would be briefer, some people longer, you know how it goes. And then if they were in the Nidra group, I would do the Yoga Nidra co-creation. So I would ask them, okay, how do you want to feel? Is there anything you want to work on? And then I would ask them, okay, does it come to mind a place or a situation where you felt in that way? And then I would just take notes, and I would try to get as much detail, especially if they were most people went to nature. And then they would just give me lots of details about the season, the colors, the time, if they were with somebody or alone. And then I would guide them into the Yoga Nidra. Everything would be protocolized apart from the visualization. People in the Nidra group, they received the recording. People in the restorative yoga with music, first part the same, but then instead of co-creating the Nidra, I put them legs up, and then they all received the same playlist with ambient gong bafi music that I had used before, and I found it very relaxing. People would practice on their own 2 to 3 weeks, and then we would have a 30 minutes catch up. If people didn't like the Nidra, we just recorded another one. And if they were happy, maybe we just had a little discussion, like how, some people didn't even want to spend the whole hour. They were like, I know what I'm doing, let me go. And some people, they just overshared, and I was just listening. And then with the restorative, some people just wanted to be guided again, and it was super short, just relax, the kind of things that we're all doing. With some people, I ended up doing a little bit of somatic experiencing in the music group. Somehow that group, they were sharing more emotional stuff, and some of them got not hyper aroused, but I could see they were really experiencing the emotions. And then I would just follow the somatic experiencing protocol. Are you experiencing anything in your body? Any form, shapes, or colors? Can you describe it to me? And it was quite interesting because some people would, we would go through the emotion, and then it seemed that the restorative yoga really helped them process what they had just witnessed with me. Quickly, I recruited 650 people, of which only 50 were fully eligible for the study. So it was a lot of work, and people had to, they had to be eligible. So, just usual screening that you do in studies. And then I needed them to be inflamed. So then I tried to predict if, because I didn't have a lot of money, so I was like, how can I make sure that the people that I scan for inflammation are the most likely to be inflamed? So I just selected people that would be diagnosable for anxiety disorder, and they were coming super high on the perceived stress scale. And then they came in, I collected the saliva, then I ran the analysis. But just to give you an idea, I should have done the analysis within 24 hours of them giving me the results. But because I couldn't, one kit is like 1,000 pounds. So I had to wait to get 37 samples before I could run the plate, which meant sometimes I had a delay of 3 months before I could run the plate, which means that it was very inaccurate what I was doing. But I didn't have the money or the volume to be able to do this all the time. So where I'm going with this is that my study is by far imperfect because the timings were completely off, but there was no other way of doing it. Regardless of all of that, I did find intervention, regardless of Nidra or music, to be acceptable, appropriate, and feasible. No complaints, people were happy. I did find both Nidra and restorative yoga with music to improve perceived stress and anxiety from baseline to end of intervention, which was those 12 weeks. And so this questionnaire is interesting because it looks both at like anxiety in the moment and more the trait as well. So some people are more likely to be anxious. So then you would compare, okay, is the change more something they're experiencing in the present moment or more a trait? So they're going a little bit deeper. And it seems that both, they changed from beginning to end. And they all moved to low levels of anxiety. And at the beginning, they were all diagnosable with severe anxiety. Here is where, please, let's take this with a big pinch of salt. I didn't find any changes in cortisol from beginning to end, but what happened was I was promised lots of money to analyze the samples. They only bought me a few kits. I didn't know, was completely unaware of what was happening. I analyzed 11 participants. The professor told me to do the statistics, and I found no significance, and he said, please don't analyze the rest. We're just going to waste money. I tried to report him, and they told me that I should not waste my time. So I wouldn't really take these results seriously. And the alternative would have been me delaying my PhD longer and had to pay more fees, and I said no. So unfortunately, this data, I wouldn't even look at it. BDNF, I did find an increase in brain-derived neurotrophic factor from baseline to end, only for the restorative yoga, not from the Nidra. If you see, the Nidra actually goes down.
Sorry, can you just explain the BDNF again?
So BDNF, brain-derived neurotrophic factor, is a transcription factor, is a molecule that starts circulating into your brain when neuroplasticity is in theory happening. The issue is
Sorry, when it's in theory.
when it's happening, if somebody is experiencing neuroplasticity, so the brain is making those new connections, these molecules should start circulating into the brain. The issue is I am not taking it in the brain, I'm taking it in their saliva. So this is a peripheral marker. The only way to be very certain, I will need to puncture their lower back, get some cerebrospinal fluid out, and check that. They would have never allowed me to do that. So what?
Was it statistically significantly different?
Yes, but I would really not. If I looked at the Cohen coefficient, there was no effect size. So I would take it very.
Okay. And because we were speaking about epigenetics, it's not a transcription factor. It's a
No.
protein complex.
But also the thing is, I could have done, okay, if I wanted to look at the epigenetics, I would have had to do a different type of analysis. So instead of doing my ELISA in my plate that you saw earlier, the blue one, I should have done a qPCR, which is a completely different type of analysis. It would have costed me a lot more money. So just this was like £3,000.
No, I'm not saying that. I'm just clarifying it's not a transcription.
No. Well, it is a transcription factor. Yes, BDNF is a transcription factor.
No, it's a protein. Well,
Is it not?
it's definitely not. In fact, transcription factors increase specifically things. We don't need to get into it, but there are various transcription factors that increase the genetic expression of BDNF, and BDNF impacts DNA in such a way that it activates transcription factors, but it's not a transcription factor.
Okay. But, so basically, I wouldn't take seriously my results, because if I really wanted to be certain, I should have gotten cerebrospinal fluid, not saliva. So this was the best I could do with the means I had. I would not say that restorative yoga with music does increase neuroplasticity. I would not say that. Yes.
You mentioned, it went down with yoga nidra.
Yes.
Up with the music.
Yes.
Tell you a little bit about what you think is going on there.
Very hard to predict. I think what happened, but these again, I can't really prove it. I think a lot of people that were in the Nidra group, they had some very bad things happening to them. I had a lot of women miscarrying. I had people having some pretty big family crisis. And I think they just had a worse life event. In theory, when you're randomizing, you should remove this effect. But I don't know if we really prevented that. So I don't know if it was just bad luck that people in the Nidra group, they just had worse life events compared to the others. And then as a consequence, maybe just went down. Another thing that could have impacted it is the time I collected it. So in theory, you should collect it only between 10 a.m. and 2 p.m. I had people coming at 8 p.m. and that was the only time I could get them in the lab. So
you think it's just down to the conditions of the experiment?
Yes. Yeah.
There's nothing intrinsic.
Yeah, and I think I could not. I tried to get people. People were working. Were coming after work, and so I was already collecting it not at the right time. The alternative was not collecting the data, so I was like, let's just collect it. But I knew what I was collecting was not good. And then at a point, I just had to accept that my study was not going to be perfect and my data was not going to be good. And I just had to do the best I could with what I had. And it was far from perfect.
But it's such important research because you're leading the way of how to do it. works, what doesn't work, how to improve it next time. It's so important what you do.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I think it's somebody else will take the baton.
Yes.
So there are more researchers who would say, I actually don't trust my data, or
Yeah.
I think that would be very, very positive.
But I definitely don't have the like by no means my study has no, like, the impact of my study is so tiny. It's like nothing. It's just a drop. Yes, maybe I paved a little bit more the way, but the thing is, like, I was being very ambitious, trying to do all this very cutting edge stuff, and my supervisor was like, "Yeah, go for it." And then you see, go for it. Yeah, very ambitious. And then, well, let's see.
What would you do differently then?
I would do it a lot simpler. I've been told that I went to do my PhD upgrade, and they were like, "Okay, very ambitious study. This is 3 PhDs."
Yeah.
And they were like, "Look, you don't need to do all of this work. Just finish, like, it's unnecessary. Just do a couple of, like, you're just making your life way harder than you need. And if an academic tells you this, it means I was really being crazy." And then they just told me, like, in a PhD, you're never going to find anything. It's just training. This is just for you to learn about how science actually works. Because in a master, you're just looking at the theory. In a PhD, you're like, all these beautiful things actually don't work in practice. And then in a postdoc, you refine it. And then you just keep going on and on and on and on and on. And then eventually, as a professor, maybe you do some good. So it's kind of like how it works. And of course, I had to swallow a lot of things and, accept that it was going to be what it was. And of course, in all of this, I was also a bit tired sometimes. And then I was just like, okay, let's just get to the end, but I have to accept it is what it is.
So a simpler study, what would that have looked like?
I would have probably just done the EEG. And of course, then it would have had limitations. Like, okay, so what my study might do in the scientific community, that they're really going to see my effort and how I really try to tick all the boxes of how to, like, limit all the possible limitations of my study. So they will be like, well done for making it so hard and collecting all this data. But then, so they will take me a little bit more seriously, because this is like true science, in theory, what I've done. But then, yeah, I think it's more likely to get published in a very good publication, because it's, in theory, on paper, looks legit. But often in a paper, you don't really say the back, like, what I'm sharing now. I would not share these kind of things necessarily when I'm writing up the scientific paper. So it's going to look very glossy, and of course I'm going to make things sound better than they are, because that's what they teach you. You're just telling a story. I will, but, and this is again another thing, like, I had one supervisor, she's German, she's like, no, we need to tell the truth. And the Italian is like, no, of course not. And he was like, let's fake the data, let's not analyze, let's fake it. And I was like, no, we're not doing this. So, you have just very different ways of working. And then I was like, no, I'm going to do the German way, I'm not going to do the Italian way. But then sometimes if I don't do the Italian way, I don't get things published. So then it's kind of like just juggling the reality of it. I think just by doing EEG would have made my life so much easier. Would have already finished, published, and I'll be at the beach. I think I just did more work. And, if I knew that I didn't want to continue, I would have learned all these things I'm never going to use again. Like, I now know how to do this super complex, like, coding for this super complex neuroimaging data I'm never going to use again. ChatGPT helped, but I don't know. I think I probably made my life way harder than it was that needed to be. Here it gets a bit more exciting, because so the EEG was cheaper than the MRI. So the data I'm going to present now is the one done with the electroencephalogram, and those are, some of them are quite some cutting, like this one I'm going to present. There are not that many studies that have done this. So even from a methodology, putting yoga aside, this is super experimental stuff. Like, there is no study on yoga looking at microstates. So the nerds will get very excited about this. But I don't know how legitimate it is, because I also know what we did to clean the data and everything. And again, I don't know if I could really trust it, but I've done my best to make it as clean and as possible. So what these things are, so these are the equivalent of fMRI, so what you get with the magnetic resonance imaging, and these are the equivalent of large brain networks, but with EEG. And basically, each one of these maps indicates a possible cognitive activity. And lots of debates on how many there are. Some people say there are 4, some people say there are 7, that doesn't matter. I'm using the more expanded version of these. And I've looked at changes in these maps before and after. So the red is a lot of activity, blue is little activity. And I have found, so
When you say a lot of activity,
generally in that area. So the limitation of microstates is that it's like, this is the summary of like millions of neurons firing. So we know that more or less is happening here, but we know like, this is like methodological studies I've done before by cognitive neuroscientists. They were like, oh, we're giving them an attention task, and when there is an attention task, we're seeing this. So we're seeing this, for example, is microstate A. We see lots of activity in the front of the brain when they're paying attention to something. And then for microstate E, which is an interoception one, when we're giving them an interoception task, we see an activity in this specific map. So that's a little bit like, a lot of science is done more like, you give them a task and then you observe, and you're like, oh, we think because when we're giving this task, we're observing this, that this thing means they were paying attention. Of course, I'm simplifying this a lot, but that's kind of the best way we have at the moment without having to cut a brain open to see what's happening inside. Far from perfect, but it's the best we have without harming people. But what was interesting is that I found an increase in duration. So what I mean by duration is how long we see this particular state happening over a 5 minutes period. So I found that microstate E, which we think that represents the salience network and interoception, is just happening more in both groups. So this could indicate that there is an increase in interoception in both groups. Then, only for the music group with restorative yoga, I found an increase both in occurrence, so how often this state happens, and coverage means more, okay, of my total data, how much of my data is in this specific state. For the microstate D, that looks at executive function and the dorsal attention network. So what this suggests is that people likely had more dynamic switching, so they were ruminating less and they were paying more attention. So what this indicates that, yes, the salience network is a bit stronger, so they're probably paying a little bit more attention to things. So they're ruminating less and their mind wandering less, and they're being more focused.
So that was in the music, restorative.
Only in the music and restorative, not in the nidra. I actually didn't find any effect of the microstates only in the nidra. Yeah. And then this one is interesting. I found an increase in the occurrence of microstate G for both groups. For the microstate that looks at somatosensory network, so somatosensory feeling, moving. And potentially what this could indicate is that they experience greater well-being. And then the rest I've already explained. So potentially, so both group have potentially experienced an increase in interoception, but only the music group experience a change in attention. Go.
Why did you choose the music group as a control group? Why not something completely different?
Because it was easier to implement, and I think there were no studies that were comparing two similar yogic techniques, but one was cognitive and one not. I talk about it later, that I think a little bit of the limitation that we have in the current literature is that studies, they pack up lots of things together. They give them meditation, movement, breath work, and then we don't know what drives what. So I was really trying to unpack it and be like, only two techniques, and let's compare what happens. And I am finding that there are differences. Okay.
I can see a logic in what you're doing, because I mean, so music and yoga, just relaxation. So relaxation yoga classes are all people experience. Music is all a big thing that people experience. You put it together, and so people reading the paper will know what the control group represents.
Yes.
Okay? And then you introduce the yoga nidra, and say, what on earth is that? But you're saying that no, it's comparable to this, and then what are the differences, in terms of outcome?
Yeah. And also another thing that came up when I thought about it 3 years ago now was that one was cognitive and one was not. Because the nidra, there is language, while with the relaxation, there is no language. So one is personalized and one is not. So then I was trying to see, okay, does the personalization does something or not? From what I'm finding, no. But I wouldn't exclude that there is an effect. As I've been banging on, the data is what it is. So, I could have missed out a lot of things. So I wouldn't say that yoga nidra is less effective. What I'm going to show the next slide then is interesting, because now I found the opposite. So this is a task where you're asking people to tell you how many heartbeats they're feeling in specific time frames. Is a subjective marker of interoception. So you collect 4 trials, 20 seconds, 45 seconds, 1 minute, 1 minute and a half, and then I have an ECG, so I'm actually collecting how many real heartbeats they have, and then I ask them how many they've counted. And what's interesting is that the Nidra people, they've actually counted better than the restorative people. So the subjective perception of interoception is better in the Nidra than in the music. But then if I'm looking at the physiological data, I see more an effect in the music than in the Nidra. And you just raised something very important. I think I had some people undiagnosed that they were neurodivergent. I had a couple of people that they really couldn't listen to the music. They told me they were getting super angry or super panicky. And other people, they told me they would just fall asleep. And I didn't know about this when I gave them the playlist. And some people, they were like, I can't practice. This is horrible. Please give me something else. And I think they had a lot of traits. Of course, I'm not a doctor, I cannot diagnose, but I could feel there was something. I cannot, again, it's co-founding factors. I cannot say, if you're, so I just don't know.
Would that be exclusive criteria?
So the thing is, I think there are lots of people, especially if they're a little bit older, that are not diagnosed. A lot of the people that had this effect, they were well above 45, because I was recruiting people from 25 to 65 to have such as broad as possible sample. And all the people I had, they had no diagnosis, but then I did the diagnostic questionnaires and they all had anxiety, like severe anxiety, but they were all undiagnosed. Social media, we put banners at bus stops, we put banners in the hospital, anywhere possible. But yeah, from the local community. Quite a few of them were yoga teachers. And I had a mix, I have to say. It was good. I had also quite a few men, which I was very glad that they came, because normally there are not many men taking part in this kind of studies. I had people, I think, from most ethnic groups, so it was very ethnically diverse, And I think it's because I'm in Denmark Hills, so it's easier to get a wider pool. I even had this family, they traveled from Newcastle to give me the data. So they took a train to come down. It was a daughter and a father. And they really wanted to help. Yeah, they were very sweet. And, it was such a commitment also for them I didn't pay for the train. They had to pay for it. I had no money to pay for that. And they came down twice. So it was very mixed group. And I was, they really helped. These people gave me lots of their time. This is another interesting finding. So beta waves, they indicate an aroused state, so more sympathetic dominance, while when they're in alpha, they're in a more relaxed state. And then there is this analysis called beta alpha ratio, where you look at the difference between the two ratios over time. And I did find a statistical improvement in beta alpha ratio only in the music group. So it seems that the music, and this analysis, I think, is probably the most correct of all the ones I've done, because this is easier, everything. So it seems that the restorative yoga is more effective at reducing arousal and potentially increasing parasympathetic activity than yoga nidra. Like, this is still a very preliminary analysis that I have, but I think that it's just a bit easier maybe for people to come down when they're listening to music than when they need to think about something. I haven't written the discussion yet, so I need to look at the literature and what it says. I literally analyzed this 2 weeks ago, so it's still quite fresh.
Playing the same time that you were guiding them, or was they
Completely
completely quiet?
quiet. So only the first time when they were with me, I just told them to feel the support of the floor, feel the support of the chair or the bed, allow the breath to be natural and their mind to go wherever it wanted to go. This was the instruction. That was it. Yeah.
And then they just listen to the music.
Correct.
Music can be, I know you mentioned it, but how did you come to pick the music? It can be a very personal.
Yes. So a friend of mine, he used to be a famous musician, and he is extremely picky with his music, and we created this playlist together. And he's a very good musician, and he has been using it a lot to relax himself. I've been using this playlist for a long time. I've given it to some of my clients, and I was like, okay, if I get the approval from the music Nazi, it's probably good quality. And it was from oh god, I don't remember now the guy. It's not Tom Hop. It's one of those pretty now commercial yogic music, relaxation music.
So was it words or was it
Just music, just instrumental, and is a ambient. And there is a gong bath and another one that he produced for psychedelic therapy, one of his albums that he created just on he's a meditator, he's a yogi. So I was like, okay.
So when you say it's a playlist, you mean it's a compilation of different kinds of music?
Yes.
And they're all listening to the same?
Yes, correct. Apart from 2 people that they told me they really couldn't listen to it, and then I've given them something else, which again I should have not done. But the alternative was not to collect the data. So again, it's by doing that I broke the protocol.
And when you say they were doing restorative yoga, do you mean they were just lying in shavasana?
With legs elevated.
So the supported shavasana, they were
Yes.
doing various restorative poses?
Not just one. But then again, I had a person with fibromyalgia, and the only position she could be was seated on her sofa. So she was not reclined, and I had another person that she was very difficult, and I was like, getting whichever position you want. I was like, getting whichever position you're relaxed. I had a few people that I could tell they were trying to control and everything. I was like, okay, you get comfortable, do your thing. And I had this guy that he would do the restorative yoga on the bus, and he would fall asleep on the bus because he didn't have time to do it elsewhere. And again, like,
You know what you were saying about you relaxed to do this on?
and I had And people would tell me about all the random things they did with it. And then I was like, okay, the alternative is I don't do the study or I just get what I get. And of course, I cannot really write these things in the paper. And of course, these graphs, they look pretty, but they don't capture the reality. And then, somebody had somebody dying, somebody else had, some miscarriages. And then I had like lots of issues with this kind of things happening. And in the end, what you do sometimes I was just listening to them at the phone. So again, that was not meant to be the protocol, but if I have an emergency, I'm just gonna pick it up and listen to them. Yeah, and I had people dropping and coming and going, and then people had another thing that happened. A lot of people had their mortgages going up, and then they had to pick up extra work. And then they were like, I need to let it go because I don't have more time to practice. Like this poor lady with 2 kids, single mother. And I was like, bless you, don't, please make your life easier. You don't need to do this for me. Just do what you need. Yeah. And then there is the whole human side that this data doesn't capture. And, the scientists, yes, for them is, but, there is so much that the paper will not collect the complexity of the human experience. So,
just about graph again. These are forest plots, are they?
this one is a violin.
Violin.
Yeah.
Just explain. So the beta alpha ratio
Mm-hmm.
in this particular graph for music and is a little bit lower in total than the meter end.
So there is no significant difference between the ratio at baseline and end for the Nidra group. So this difference is not significant. But then the difference between baseline and end for the music is significant. Yeah. But then another thing that it comes in the next slides is a little bit nerdy. So I have run some models to look at like correlations and to look at confounding effects. I found nothing. Like I kept running analysis and I was finding nothing. I was trying to see, okay, can the changes in mental health predict the changes in the BDNF or in the neuroimaging markers? I was always getting no. So in a way, none of what I found answers my model. So, and my supervisor, she's so sad. She's like, I'm so sorry that you're finding nothing. I'm really okay with it. Because actually all the hypotheses I made, apart from the mental health, none of them stood. So I found nothing of what I was looking for. That Yoga Nidra would increase neuroplasticity, would reduce inflammation, would reduce cortisol, would improve mental health, and would improve interoception. And yes. And then
keeping in mind all the confounders, all the things, all the other variables. I think that those results were good enough to actually evaluate that question.
No.
So we don't actually know.
No, because also my study already became really imperfect when I delayed the analysis of the inflammatory markers. Because then perhaps people that then got into the study, they were not inflamed anymore. Because maybe I collected data 3 months earlier, they were inflamed here and then, but then 3 months later, maybe they were fine. So maybe I had people in the study that I would have seen nothing anyways. So,
Interesting to see what we were doing and just gives us so many ideas, isn't it? Future research. It's really impressive.
It just goes to show how difficult it is.
Oh yeah.
And no wonder clinical trials are so rare in things like yoga where there isn't much money.
And so expensive. Only the pharmaceuticals can afford them. Only the pharmaceutical companies can afford them.
Oh yeah.
Private clinics or whatever, yeah.
And that's a little bit with all of these goes that, I think the yoga community has done outstanding, considering that most studies out there have been done with no money, no time, and no expertise. So I think as a community, we should be very proud of what has been achieved with literally the world against us in a way. because I've spoken with other researchers and they're all doing it in the evenings after they already worked like 10 hours, maybe they have kids. So, also their cognitive function is not at the prime when they're working on these papers and this stuff. I'm sure I've made lots of mistakes collecting the data, and I've done lots of mistakes analyzing the data because sometimes I was also tired and I had nobody to check it. But I think considering all the limitations, we're doing very good, very well, and it also shows how much passion there is in what we're doing. And I think we're all a little bit Don Quixotes trying to get things out there. And I feel very bad to talk about limitations of the study because I know why there are those limitations. It's not they're lazy, they don't want to do things well. I just know how hard it is. I'm like, well done you for having done what you've done. So I feel very bad critiquing them because I think they've done the best they could. But overall, I think Heather has already spoken about this. We do know that yoga improves mental health, and there is plenty of evidence on perceived stress, anxiety, and depression. We know that it improves quality of life, sleep quality, improves interoception, potentially improves metabolism. It does improve parasympathetic tone. It seems to downregulate the HPA axis. It seems to reduce inflammation. And again, here the issue is they've been talking about looking more at the genes rather than the molecules because there's a more precise way of looking at things. And I don't think this is necessarily an issue in yoga research, it's more in science in general, because normally all scientists use a method and then we just collect lots of data and then we're like, this method is not very good. And then we're like, there is this new method that is better. So then you just need to repeat everything with the new method. So I think the reason why we don't have very good data of inflammation is just because the methods were not very good. And we were all just trialing it out. And same with neuroplasticity. Like I wouldn't really trust the things on BDNF. I would trust things more looking at transcriptomics. But again, they're very new things. Like they really just started recently and there are not many people doing that. So it will come eventually. Yes, the questionnaires. Yeah. Yeah, and that's what I found. I think that's the thing that I can say with more confidence, that there is definitely an effect on mental health, that I would be very confident in saying. I would be a lot less confident with the rest. But I think that's also why most studies have done the questionnaires. Because that's, it's easy, but then of course has all the limitations being subjective. But then when you try to do the scientific way, then the methods unfortunately are far from perfect. And yeah.
It was very encouraging to see increases interoception, perception of pain. The MICE guidelines have changed since 2021 under chronic pain. Changed the whole model of chronic pain now.
Okay.
They no longer advocate prescription of strong pain medication. They now advocate CBT and relaxation. And that's the way that yoga can come.
Yes.
2021, MICE guidelines, chronic pain. MICE guidelines have changed radically. It's a paradigm shift. So all the old pain medication, all the pregabalin, only antidepressants are now recommended for chronic pain. None of the old pain medication. It's all going to be phased out.
Because we actually know that,
how pain works.
And this is super, super interesting. I did an assignment on this during my master, that the same pathways that modulate pain, they also modulate depression. So there seems to be some crossovers. I think we don't fully understand. I don't remember it. Again, it's a long time ago. And I was trying to do a PET study. It was like a proposal where to try to understand why they're crossovers, but we don't know. The thing is, like the neuroscience, they don't really know why they work. Like a lot of medications are given. They're just given because we know they work. We don't know why they work. We don't know. We don't know. And also when you speak with the big neuroscientists, most of them, they tell you we just don't know most things, and we just do our best with what we have. But they know that the methods are not perfect. They know the way we collect data is not perfect. They just keep going, hoping that we get better as we're going along. But there are very few professors that will tell you this is the truth. This we know. Yeah, and I think that was very humbling process to also know that, you know, science is incremental. We all doing a bit, but it's a bit, and you know, nobody will solve an issue, will solve a problem, will make a big. It's not a one person making a discovery; it's a collective of people working together.
I mean, that changed in the NICE guidelines in 2021. The original research was in the 1980s with Melbourne and Ethel. Back in the 1980s, that was the original research. It was never understood until 40 years later.
Wow.
To add to everything that you've been saying on inflammation, which is a huge part of this, both depression and physical sensations, pain, both send inflammatory signals to the insula. So you have that overlap. And when you have a particular mood and you send signals and you already have some relationship, you activate the same pathways. So it all links together. And then if you reduce inflammation, you can reduce depression.
Yes.
So
Yes.
it's a nice kind of 360 piece.
Yes. Yes. Yeah, it's all it's all together, and that's all connected, and I think that's what a lot of medical research has missed, that, you know, it's really psychoneuroendoimmunology, where it's like all these things coming together and one affects the other. Unfortunately, as the methods have shown, we cannot yet measure the theory in a way that is accurate. We're just doing the best we can, but I hope that in the next 20 years, as technology gets better, as AI gets better, we will be able to do these very complex studies in a way that is higher quality. And we do, well, I did the best I could.
So it's also interesting you were saying before that the antihistamines are not making an effect for reducing depression. Is that what you said?
No,
Medications are not helping to reduce inflammation.
so anti-inflammatory medications.
Anti-inflammatory.
Yeah, but again, there are a few people in the US that have done this type of studies, and Pariante that I work with has also done a bit. But if you look at the studies, let's say there are 10 studies, I don't remember how many there are. 5 say one thing, 5 say exactly the opposite thing. And they've also tried to replicate, and you know, it's medicine, so there is a lot more cash. These studies are huge. There is a lot of interest in them, and even those ones. But literally any paper I wrote in my master, I was always saying the same thing. The evidence is contradictory. Therefore, more studies need to happen. This is kind of like the mantra.
More potential for yoga because of global effect, hitting all the endocrine, all the neurotransmitters.
But then, I'm going to leave you with this. There are only a few studies, so again, pinch of salt. But it seems that for depression, if you have 3 groups, yoga, antidepressants, and antidepressants with yoga, it seems that the group that works better is the combination. So again, it's not one thing, but it's multiple things together. Yeah. So this is where I think we need to go. Yeah.
Although I never took any more migraine medication after those 2 weeks. And my neurologist gave me a Sainsbury bag full of medication. He said, you've got to take this for the rest of your life. And I said, whoa. I said, well, let me try my yoga first.
But then you've also said something, there is the power of the mind. You know, I think we could go around and each one of us would have a story about something that has disappeared inside of us. You know, I have had multiple conditions that I don't have anymore that I used to have.
I think I'm a pretty pragmatic person. I don't really go to beliefs of things. I'm a British empiricist at heart. I do what works. I wasn't that particularly attached to whether yoga was going to work or not. I was kind of desperate in that situation. Well, hang on, before I take all this medication, which is quite toxic.
Yeah.
Because that includes antipsychotics, actually. And you've got to change them around because they have a lot of bad side effects. chronic migraines. I was kind of desperate, and I thought, well, hang on, let me just double my meditation and see what happens.
But then again, I think is this, and this, I don't know if we can measure it, but the power of the mind, and like, okay, yes, I can give you one study that kind of explains a little bit this. Again, is one study, pinch of salt, but there is a colleague of Montreal University that he looked at physiological responses to stress by ask people what was their perception of stress. So the people that said that stress is good for them, when they do a task that is stressful, they don't have a cortisol spike. And the people that say the stress is bad for them, they have a massive spike. And what this to me could potentially suggest is that how you perceive something and how you think about it, your mindset.
I'm sure it does, yeah. But I think there's also the psychoneuroimmunology taking part. There's a lot of things going on. Perhaps.
Yeah, of course. It's never one thing.
But people's background, people's stories are very different. Some people will view and experience stress negatively because of what they've been through in their early lives, and they will set a pattern of perceiving stress in a negative way. Whereas other people, when they're young, they have sort of more positive experiences. So there's a
So my switch. In my case, I had a very heavy load of oxidative stress in my childhood, trauma, and a lot of stuff. So I didn't have, my mother had genetic migraines. There's a lot of history there. Yoga saved me. Actually, when I was 18, I thought, wow, I've got to drop this alcohol. That's not helping me. Let me do something else. And I went cold turkey, went into an ashram, and never looked back.
Yeah, and I think as stories like this that keep us going and keep us hoping. And of course, I could now give you all the possible new things we could do, but I think the main thing is in the top right hand corner because without that, all of these beautiful fancy studies cannot happen. And I think the main issue I faced is that as a yoga therapist, I'm not a allied healthcare professional. Therefore, I had access to no public funding. And until yoga therapy is an allied healthcare profession, there is no access to paid PhDs by the state or any kind of research. And then, also what that implies working with the NHS.
I'm wondering if there is another way of doing, people are already doing their own studies in their own way without using these kind of machines and so on that are also incredibly expensive.
Yes.
And if we had more and bigger studies, but done in a way that doesn't involve so much quality.
So the only solution I have found to this, I found two solutions to the money problem. One is to work with corporate clients. So to go to somebody like Boston Consulting Group or a big bank, they have a burnout epidemic. You tell them I collect data and then I fix your problem. You give me tons of money because for you it costs you a lot. And then you collect the data through them. Another idea I had is to open a private clinic and to collect the data with the people coming to the private clinic. So people pay you for the service, and then it's a business. The issue is if you want to do research in academics is difficult. Like for example, because I will hopefully have my PhD, I can forever be a researcher at King's. That's what many people do. They remain associated with King's. They keep the email, they keep the name. You publish under King's name. They love it because they don't need to pay for you. And, it's just, I scratch your back, you scratch my back kind of thing. And I can keep publishing with them forever if I want to. And I don't need to, as far as I don't ask for money, they're all happy. Because the more I publish, the better the university gets. And, they're happy to pay me for a few lectures per year because I'm still giving them a service. But that is kind of the best scenario I found. For me, in this particular moment of my life, I think I want to prioritize other things. and I want to have a bit of a simpler life. So I think I'm going to take a step back for a while. And who knows, maybe one day I change my mind. But I think I got to the peak of my hedonistic treadmill, and I'm like, why more? What is really this doing for me? Do I need more? Yeah, why more external validation? So that's a little bit my journey. But yeah,
Thank you.
thank you.